What's up, everybody? My name is Jeffrey Gardner. Welcome back once again to another episode of Upset Alert. It is episode number 61 of the Ultimate College Football Podcast, celebrating all 130 teams in FBS. Now, once again, with the caveat that, of course, in this fall football season for college football, we are looking at 76 teams that will actually be competing within FBS. So we have made our way on this show thus far, ranking every single team in college football for the 2020 season, all the way from the bottom of the pack through number 7. So yesterday's episode, we did talk about number 7, Notre Dame, the Fighting Irish. That was a team that I predicted to go 9-1, taking a look at their schedule for the 2020 season. I had Notre Dame losing just one game on the regular season to Clemson, so that is a team that I really think has a lot of potential to win a lot of football games. They could actually even make it all the way to that ACC championship game in a weird one-off year where Notre Dame is qualifying for that ACC championship game based on the number of games, of course, that they're playing within the conference. So taking a look at today's episode, we are going to be switching things up, of course, from the ACC to the SEC today. So I told you guys a couple of days ago when we were talking about Auburn, for example, on here, and Texas A&M. Those were in back-to-back episodes, that we would be moving over into the SEC East territory pretty soon, and that is the case today. For those of you watching live on twitch.tv/robotbraineater, you already see it probably in the title here that we're going to be talking about the Florida Gators today. So talking some Florida Gators football here, and this is a team that, of course, is being highly celebrated for this upcoming season. A team that a lot of folks think could be the sexy pick to upset Georgia in the SEC East this year. Who knows? I truly don't. If that's going to happen this season, I still think Georgia should be considered the team to beat out of the SEC East. I still think there's a reason why they are higher on our rankings than Florida for this upcoming 2020 season. But of course, Florida is a great football team, just like they were last year. So what we're going to do is, as always, take a look back at 2019 for the Gators, see where they're coming from a little bit here. But first, just a little bit of housekeeping. As a reminder, if you do want to watch us live, we do tweet out the time at which we'll be going live on twitch.tv/robotbraineater. We send that out at Upset Alert Pod on Twitter every day, normally with at least a couple of hours notice, as best as we can due to kind of dynamic scheduling changes throughout the day. Just want to give you a bit of a run of how this week is going to go down for us scheduling-wise. So today and tomorrow we will continue with our daily live format here on twitch.tv/robotbraineater. We will be taking the day off Wednesday, the 26th. So no show on Wednesday. We'll have a day off there. Thursday we will be back, and we will continue straight through at that point until we are through predicting the number one team in the country. After we have predicted all of the games for everyone in college football by that point, we are on the home stretch here at this point, headed into the top 6 today. Once we wrap that up, we will take another short break of a day or two before doing a conference championship prediction, and then we'll get into our regularly scheduled programming for the 2020 season, doing 2 episodes a week. We'll kind of play it by ear on what days exactly those will fall on, but most likely it's looking like our first regular episode will fall on September the 1st, most likely Tuesday, September the 1st, maybe Wednesday the 2nd, as kind of an official preview for that first set of games that we have coming up and then a review episode of what happened that week in college football coming later on that week. So essentially, that's the way the show will be working going forward, with 2 episodes a week once we get through these previews and predictions for everyone's regular season schedule. But today, of course, like I said, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we are going to be talking about the Florida Gators. So let's go ahead and take a look at Florida's schedule from 2019 first here, and we'll run through some of the highlights here. So this team was 11-2 in 2019, 6-2 in the conference. Finished the season actually with a nice little 4-game win streak, and they were 6-0 at home. So not too bad of a split because they did only have 2 losses, but you do notice 6-0 at home versus 3-1 on the road, 2-1 in neutral site action. Interesting, you don't see a ton of teams that play 3 neutral site games in a year, but you get this Miami game that was kicking off the regular season last year, was technically neutral site in Orlando, so both teams out of the state of Florida didn't want to play on either of their home turfs there, I suppose. Of course, they played Georgia every year in Jacksonville in neutral site action, and then their bowl game, of course, to close out the regular season. So a bit of an interesting look there for the Gators. But kicking things off, as I mentioned, they played in kind of a week 0 spot last year against Miami in that neutral site game in Orlando. The Gators won that one 24-20, a very close game to kick off their regular season last year. September the 7th, they moved on to UT Martin, picked up a big blowout win, 45-0. Won 29-21 at Kentucky. For those of you who watched this game last year, this was a situation of Kentucky grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory. Kentucky should have had that game won a couple times probably in Lexington last year, blew the game. Gators found a way to win it. Kentucky found a way to lose it, whatever way you want to look at it. September the 21st, they played against Tennessee. That game, which has had some good moments over the last few years in terms of that early season rivalry between Florida and Tennessee, was not nearly as exciting last year, 34-3. Remember how bad Tennessee was early in the season last year, losing to teams like Georgia State, so they were not going to be competitive with a pretty great Florida Gators team on that day. September 28th versus FCS Towson. It was a 38-0 win for the Gators there. Not much to talk about. October the 5th, that was a win 24-13 against Auburn. That's a pretty impressive win. And really you have to look to this point in the season just to see where Florida was to get the vibe coming into this LSU game. Because this team was 6-0. So they were 6-0 coming into the LSU game, which kicked off the second half of the season for the Gators. And this was a 42-28 loss. This game was back and forth, actually, for most of the game against the eventual national champion LSU Tigers. This game was played in Baton Rouge. It was really back and forth. It was kind of both teams just matching score for the bulk of the game, I would say. LSU gets it to a 2-score lead late in the game there. But this was maybe the most impressive game, actually, on Florida's resume last year, and it was a loss because LSU was so incredibly good last year that to keep it close with them for pretty much the entire game, I think had most people coming in more impressed than when they were 6-0 actually coming into that game. They actually looked better coming out than they did going in somehow, even losing. They won 38-27 at South Carolina. Not much to talk about there. That's not a particularly sexy SEC win, but they got the job done. November 2nd versus Georgia in Jacksonville. This one 24-17. Now I'm going to say something, and this is maybe a little bit of my Georgia Bulldog bias coming out here, but that game, contrary to the LSU game, which was probably a little closer throughout most of the game than 42-28, this 24-17 score probably makes it look a little closer than it actually was. So kind of the opposite story being told there. Georgia really never lost control of this football game. Florida's offense for almost the entire game just couldn't get anything going at all, and Georgia's defense was pretty stifling for the most part on that day. Of course, despite his late season struggles last year and his struggles overall for most of the season, Jake Fromm in his career at Georgia was a Gators killer. This game was no exception. He went off that day in Jacksonville, and the Dogs gave the Gators their second loss in the conference. November the 9th, it was a big-time blowout to bounce back 56-0 versus Vanderbilt. Followed that up with a 23-6 win at Missouri. You see that Gators defense buckling down late in the season. Versus Florida State, it was a 40-17 win. And then they went on to play Virginia, who of course had a somewhat magical run to get to the ACC championship game in the Capital One Orange Bowl, and they won over Virginia 36-28. So pretty good way for the Gators to close out the season. Two big blowout wins against Vandy and Missouri. Pretty big blowout against Florida State as well. Closer game against Virginia, but an Orange Bowl win to close out the season. Your only losses in the regular season come to Georgia. Of course, that one hurts for them because Georgia has now won the East 3 seasons in a row, 2017, 18, and 19, over these Gators. And, of course, the loss to the eventual national champions in LSU. You can't be too mad about that one. So taking a look at this 2020 schedule now, and I'll take a brief moment just to note that there, of course, is some talent that the Gators are going to have to replace for the upcoming season. They've got a lot of folks on defense that they're going to have to be replacing. Zuniga comes to mind as one along the defensive line. Of course, they just have a lot of talent overall on defense, I think, in Florida in general. They've done a decent job of getting some big-time players in there. But over the course of the offseason here, of course, the NFL draft is taking its toll on this Gators defense. I do think the defensive line particularly will be taking a step in the wrong direction. They like to pride themselves on their defensive back play. I know a lot at Florida as well. Them and LSU both like to claim that DBU title. But the important thing to know is this is still going to be a great team, all right? The guys coming in behind them, it's not that they're bad. It's just that you don't necessarily expect them to come in and contribute in the way that their predecessors did over the last couple of seasons as starters. A lot of folks are on the offensive side of the ball saying that Kyle Trask could very well be the best returning quarterback in the SEC this year. And let's take a moment to reflect on that before speaking. There aren't a lot of great returning quarterbacks in the SEC there. Let's start this. Let's start right there. You take a look at the best quarterbacks from the SEC last year. You're talking about Joe Burrow, who obviously has gone to the NFL, Tua Tagovailoa, who has gone to the NFL. You can even throw in, even though he had a down year last year, Jake Fromm from Georgia. He is gone to the NFL. There's not a lot of returning talent as far as the quarterback position goes in the SEC. Of course, Texas A&M, I guess, has a little bit of an argument here. You could make the argument that this Ole Miss offense, actually, with a guy like John Rice Plumlee and Matt Corral kind of backing him up, could maybe have a little bit of an argument here. But there's not a ton of returning talent at quarterback. Most of the big quarterbacks that you're going to be talking about coming into this year are going to be either guys that have been waiting in the wings, like, of course, you're going to see Miles Brennan coming up out of the waiting in the wings kind of moment, waiting behind Joe Burrow the last couple of seasons at LSU. You're talking about a guy who's a transfer quarterback in Jamie Newman at Georgia, who's getting a lot of preseason hype, decent Heisman odds there. You're talking about Felipe Franks, who transferred from Florida to Arkansas. But, of course, when it comes to the returning quarterbacks, it is kind of hard to make an argument, I think, at least a compelling one, against Kyle Trask. being the best returning quarterback. Now, that doesn't really mean squat because the returning quarterback conversation is really just semantics, right? That doesn't make Florida the best team at quarterback in the SEC by any stretch of the imagination. Look no further than their SEC East counterpart, Georgia. You're talking about a guy in Jamie Newman that was a serious dual threat impact player at Wake Forest last season. I know he had probably an overall better receiving core than Georgia did last year, but maybe not than Georgia does this year. So you're talking about a big guy there. You're talking about JT Daniels, a former 5-star recruit who transferred over from USC to Georgia as well. You're talking about guys in LSU and Texas A&M and Alabama who just have found pretty consistently good quarterback play over the last couple of seasons as a general rule. So I don't think that Kyle Trask is necessarily going to put up some of the sexy big plays that some of those other guys are going to do. But I'm not disparaging Kyle Trask. I do think he's a really good football player, and I'd actually like to read off some stats to contradict all the maybe Georgia bias that I am bringing to this currently. So Kyle Trask last season played in 12 games, completed 66.9% of his passes. That is very accurate. Nearly 3,000 yards passing, which came out to about 8.3 yards per attempt. Threw for 25 touchdowns and just 7 interceptions. That is pretty good. That is pretty darn good for him there, and it's hard to make an argument against that being a guy who could lead his team to another 11-win type season, at least if it were a traditionally full 12-game schedule. But taking a look down this schedule here, let's just jump right into it. September the 26th at Ole Miss. There's not a ton to say here. Ole Miss's offense, as I was just saying, I do think is a really dynamic offense. How shall we say this? They don't have a lot going for them on defense. I've voiced my opinions on here before. I really like the energy that Lane Kiffin is going to bring to Oxford at Ole Miss. I think he's going to revolutionize that offense. They're going to be even better. They're going to take advantage of all the talent that they have at the skill positions and, of course, at quarterback as well. This defense is going to need a few years to be a truly competitive team at any kind of at any level in the SEC. Florida, week 1, is getting a win in Oxford. October 3rd versus South Carolina. This is in the Swamp. Of course, we're talking about limited fans, so don't know how big the home field advantage will be in the Swamp this year versus last year when they were 6-0 at home. However, the Gamecocks, despite beating Georgia last year, are not a great football team out of the SEC East. They're in the bottom half of the division. Georgia, of course, last year was a monumental win for them, but that was still a team that went 4-8. The Gamecocks are simply not a team that I can predict to come into the Swamp and come out with a win. That looks like the Gators on October 3rd to me. October the 10th at Texas A&M. Won't spend too much time on this one either because we already talked about Texas A&M's breakdown of their schedule a couple days ago. So if you've listened to that episode already, you know how I'm going on this one. It's the Gators for me. This game is in College Station. That does make it a little tougher for Florida. I do really think Texas A&M is a talented football team, and while I can imagine the possibility for them turning a corner and really getting more value out of all that money they are paying for Jimbo Fisher right now, I don't think it's happening this year, really, especially not in an SEC-only schedule. You look at Texas A&M historically over the last few years, and they have gone about 500 in the SEC since joining it for the most part. So I like the Gators. The Gators are certainly better than average in the SEC. They're one of the top 4 teams in the league this year, and that's not the type of team that A&M has been able to beat in their time in the SEC. October 17th versus LSU. Florida could be coming into this game feeling pretty good about themselves if they've got big wins probably at Ole Miss and versus South Carolina, and maybe a tougher road win at Texas A&M. But October 17th in the Swamp, LSU will have their work cut out for them. I'll say that. LSU is taking a step back this year because of Joe Burrow, because of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, rather, because of Joe Brady, the passing game coordinator, of course, who we all heard his name so many times on every football broadcast of an LSU game last year. This is an LSU team, like I said, it's taking a slight step back this year, but when you take a step back from one of the greatest football teams of all time, how far can you really go back? Right? Because this team has truly, everyone who was on this team last year who is still there has tasted true greatness, and that is a rare thing in college football these days. They are breathing rarefied air that only really the Alabamas and maybe you can argue the Ohio States of the world, and Clemson, of course, have tasted in the last decade. That is the quality of team we are talking about here for the LSU Tigers. And I really just can't imagine them going too far back, despite some of the crazy talent that they have this year. They have tougher games on their schedule than the Florida Gators, even on the road, because of course they've got to play Alabama on there. I just think LSU is going to win this football game. I know last year it was close, and some folks think Florida will be better this year. I don't necessarily think that. I do think LSU takes a little bit of a step back this year, but I still like the Tigers in this matchup. This is one of my favorite cross-division rivalries, as a side note, because it tends to get chippy every single year. I really do enjoy watching this LSU-Florida game every year, and I'm gonna give it to the Tigers as kind of a mid-season litmus test of East versus West. October the 24th versus Missouri. This is a game that the Gators need to win because of where it falls in their schedule. It's between LSU and a bye week, which is then followed by Georgia. Florida needs to get the momentum. They need to right the ship after what I think is a loss to LSU. Missouri is not going to be a team to really call home about. They do have a head coach that I like a lot in Eli Drinkwitz, who has about as impressive of an overall record as you can as a head coach. Don't get too used to it, Coach Drinkwitz. I don't think you're going undefeated at Missouri like you did almost at App State. This is a win for Florida here. Simply put, I think they know how important this game will be. With the bye week before Georgia here, that kind of cancels the thought of this game being a trap game to me. I think they pick up the win in the Swamp. They head to their bye week, and they get ready for the Georgia Bulldogs, because bottom line, they know even if they've lost to LSU at this point, everything will still be on the table if they can beat Georgia in that game there. So, November 7th. Both teams, of course, have the bye week before. This game is still being played in Jacksonville, formerly known as the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, Georgia and Florida. This is the game that will tell the tale of the Gators season. Not just the Gators season, really, but truthfully, Dan Mullen's time thus far at Florida. I cannot stress enough how important this game is for both teams, but particularly for Florida in this upcoming season, because Georgia, if you think back over the last few seasons when they have won the East, and of course you look at a team in Florida that under Jim McElwain won the SEC East in 2015 and 16, but was really, it was really not taking that next step as a football team in terms of winning the SEC, or at least being competitive in those games in Atlanta. They simply weren't, right? In 2015 and 16, they were not on the same level as the elite of the West, and those games just weren't even close. By contrast, look at what Georgia's done in the last 3 years. 2017, they win the SEC. They go to the national championship game, lose it, of course, in shocking, not upset fashion, I suppose, but unbelievable fashion against Alabama. 2018, Georgia wins the SEC East and loses the SEC championship game in a very similar fashion to Alabama. 2019, not as close of a game against LSU, but LSU, again, didn't play too many close games last year. LSU beat pretty much everyone up that they played in 2019. So Georgia, I think, has taken that step to that elite tier to sit at the table with Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State. And Florida simply has not to this point. Because ever since Dan Mullen has been there, he is winless against Georgia. Now, he came closer last year than the year prior, right? So this was a decent game in 2019, whereas 2018 not particularly close. Florida has taken steps in the right direction. But can they really take that next step? Because if they beat Georgia in this game, I think, to me, that signifies they have taken that step. If they beat Georgia, then they're beating a Georgia team who's going to be a legitimate top 4 type team. And if they do that, then that is making a statement that, hey, whoever we play, whether it's Alabama, LSU, whoever out of the West, it is not going to be a pushover this time. This Florida team is here to play for real. But let's cool our jets a little bit. I think Georgia is going to Atlanta, in all likelihood, for a 4th year in a row. I like the Bulldogs to beat the Gators. I just don't see, and again, take this all with a grain of salt. I am a Georgia Bulldog. I am an alumnus of the University of Georgia. I try to check that as much as I possibly can when I'm making my predictions here. I don't see enough in this Florida Gators team for 2020 to make me think that they will topple Georgia in this year. I do think, I'm not really a subscriber to the thought of Now or Never, but those of you listening on podcasts or live on Twitch, you see the episode title is Now or Never. I don't know if it's that simple for Florida, but this might be, a case of it's not that Georgia is necessarily weak this year or anything like that, and that they need to strike while Georgia's weak. It's more so that Florida is about to lose even more of their top players. So if they don't win against Georgia this year, they might be in some trouble, because it might get worse in the couple of years to come for the Gators. So if they don't strike now, it is possible that the Gators fall behind a team like Tennessee, who's doing a pretty good job recruiting right now. Maybe a team like Kentucky, who's kind of a sexy pick to be a dark horse in the SEC East this year. So it could get really interesting in this one. I think it's a close game. I think it's a really close game. Maybe a better game than the last 2 seasons, and I think part of that is not because Florida's a better team this year, but I think because they have so much still to play for at this point in the season and early in the year. You're talking about a Florida team that if they've lost to LSU, if they lose to Georgia in this game, they could be, for all intents and purposes, out of it 6 weeks into a 10-week season. And I simply don't think they will lay down and let something like that happen. You will get both of these teams' best performances on this day because they know how much it means. There's a possibility, because Georgia gets Alabama early in the season, there's a possibility they both come in with a loss to this game, and it might be do or die for both teams. I'm giving it to Georgia, though. November 7th. I think Florida picks up their second loss to that point, and they're 4-2 with losses to LSU and Georgia heading into this final stretch that looks pretty manageable, to be honest with you. These all kind of zoom through. November 14th versus Arkansas. That is a win for the Gators. Felipe Franks, of course, their ex-quarterback, is probably going to have some kind of vengeance on his mind in that football game coming down into the swamp under brand new head coach. But this is definitely a Florida win for me. November 17th against the Hogs. They're the worst team out of the West in all likelihood. I won't waste your time there. November 21st at Vanderbilt. Copy and paste the exact same thing I just said. They're the worst team in the East. That is a definite win for Florida unless disaster strikes. November 28th versus Kentucky. Kentucky is not a pushover. We've spoken about them ad nauseum, and if they can push to be the third or fourth best team in the East this year, I don't expect them to win in the swamp. If you're going to circle a game on here in the last 4-game stretch to watch out for, maybe this is the one. Maybe it's at Tennessee the week after that. I do like this Kentucky team to improve a little bit over the next season or two, but I like the Gators to win in that one. December 5th at Tennessee. Like I said, kind of same kind of vibe for the Kentucky game. This will not be a pushover. Tennessee is going to be out of it by this point. Florida, for all intents and purposes, may be out of it as well by virtue of the fact that Georgia closes the season against Vanderbilt. So if Georgia is sitting prettier than Florida, kind of in the driver's seat at this point, you certainly like their odds to beat Vanderbilt. So Florida at Tennessee, probably, unlike when it's played earlier in the season, probably won't have any real conference championship repercussions, but it could get real chippy. It could be an interesting football game because both teams still don't like each other. They're still going to go out there and give each other their all in the final week of the regular season. Previously, I will say, when we were looking at a 12-game schedule, the way that schedule lined up, I actually picked Tennessee to beat Florida. In this schedule, in this format, going into the final week, I'm going to hold off on doing that. I'm giving it to the Gators. I think they finished the regular season at 8-2 with losses against Georgia in that neutral site game in Jacksonville and against LSU in the swamp. So this will actually be, by my estimation, a bit of a road warrior team this coming season, just because their road schedule is a lot easier, to be quite frank. They play at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, at Vanderbilt, and at Tennessee. And then that Georgia game, I suppose, technically is considered a road game, but truly a neutral site, of course. So that's about going to wrap us up for episode number 61 of Upset Alert. For those of you joining live in the chat, twitch.tv/robotbraineater. Of course, as always, feel free to drop your comments in the chat. Drop your predictions for the Florida Gators. I'll read them out live on the air for the show for everybody listening on podcast services around the world. We will be right back here tomorrow. Like I said, Wednesday we'll be taking a day off, but we'll be right back here tomorrow discussing the number 5 team in the country for 2020. We will be headed into that discussion, predictions game by game for the top 5. Of course, like I was saying, once we get through tomorrow's episode, we'll have Wednesday off. We'll be right back Thursday, plowing straight through the top 4 and into conference championship predictions before we ultimately move on to our regular season schedule, doing 2 episodes a week, kind of previewing and reviewing all of the games as they pop up on the schedule. And as a friendly reminder here before we head out for the day, did just want to let you know that it is a mere 10 days until the college football season kicks off. Thursday, September the 3rd, we get 2 games. Nothing too crazy, but we're looking at Central Arkansas at UAB and South Alabama at Southern Miss on that first day of college football. We get a few more games that Saturday, and then the following weekend will be our first Power 5 Saturday of college football, where we get a heavy slate of games. That, of course, will be the weekend of September the 12th, where we get some Power 5 teams starting to play. But just 10 days until college football kicks off. For those of you listening on Apple Podcasts, please do subscribe and leave us that 5-star review. If you are on Spotify, please do follow us on there as well. Helps us get more eyeballs and more ears on the podcast. For those of you who want to watch live or just drop a comment to us after the show, hit us up at Upset Alert Pod on Twitter, twitch.tv/robotbraineater to watch live and comment, have your comments read out live on the show. Thank you so much to you guys for listening. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and until tomorrow, we will see you then.